Now let's see this passage, right? Something that we can quickly look at. Vocabulary questions. Can I answer that quickly without having to, spend time reading the passage? Conform to. You might be familiar with this word. Dismantle. You might be familiar with this word. Capricious. You may or may not be familiar. So you might have to go back to the context and see what meaning this word is bringing in that context. Dirt. You might be familiar with this. Right? So we have two antonyms, two synonyms. We have one title of the passage. It's a skim question. So if I quickly go through the topic sentence and closing sentence in each paragraph, I might get an idea, right? So everything else seems like a little more detailed, which is following statements is correct. Then there's a specific sentence asking which is the right option. So everything else seems a little more specific. What suggestions have been cited by the writer? Okay. Which of the following sentences? So a lot of positive detailed questions. What is true in the passage, right? So conform to. Let's go back to the context. So conform to appears here in the second paragraph. It says, as emerging markets open up to global competition, consultants and foreign investors are increasingly pressuring these groups to conform to Western practice by scaling back the scope of their business activities, right? So now that we understand how it appears in the context, what are the options that we have? Comply, conflict between, confirm, confiscate, and confine to. So what's the closest? Comply. So conform to means to adhere to something. Basically to act in accordance with certain standards, expectations or specifications, and it's the same with comply as well. So the answer is option 1. Dismantle. Dismantle, we don't even have to go back to the passage, right? Dismantle means what? To remove things, to take apart, right? So obviously, what's the answer for the next one? Dismantle. I have take together, hold, take apart, disorder, dismount. I even gave out the answer when I was explaining it. But for those of you who don't know the meaning of this word, right? Dismantle. Let's go back to the context. Dismantle comes in the first paragraph, second line. Let's read. But while managers in the West have dismantled many conglomerates assembled in the 1960s and 1970s, the large diversified business group remains blah blah blah. So basically they torn apart or taken down whatever was these different distinct departments that were put together, that were joined together, a big section, a chunk of it, which is what I said conglomerates were. They took that apart. So the answer is option 3, take apart, right? So let's move on to our antonyms. Opposite meaning, capricious. Let's see where capricious and dirt, both we'll check out and then we'll come back. So capricious is here. I'm going to read the context. Law enforcement is often capricious and so slow that few who assign any value to time would resort to it. Law enforcement is often capricious and so slow that few who assign any value to time would resort to it. So I know that capricious, pay attention to the synonym hint word and then I have so slow. So I know it's not a positive word, definitely, right? Capricious actually means, I'm going to write it here. Basically something that's, unpredictable or impulsive, right? Yeah, so it's going to be a negative meaning, yes, but however we need to understand what is it in the context. So now that we understand this, we'll go back and look at the options, but we'll quickly look at dearth as well before we go back. Yeah, there it is. So in the fourth paragraph, in the first line, in the case of product markets, buyers and sellers usually suffer from a server dearth of information for 3 reasons. So dearth as it is, I assume you would be familiar with it. Dearth means lack. So now that we know the meaning that the context is giving, let's look at our options. So capricious, we need antonym. So don't go and click on option 1, which is a synonym. Alright? So the antonym here is option 2. Opposite of that. Dearth means scarcity. Again, this is a synonym. So what's the antonym here from the options? Scarcity, shortage, paucity, abundance, debility. What's the meaning of debility? Anybody? Debility also means something few in number, something weak. So the answer is abundance, obviously, right? So 4 vocabulary questions. If you know the word, you can quickly identify the option. If you don't know the word, you fall back on the context and try and figure out the meaning, and then come back and look at the options. Okay, so this is our first question. Which of the following sentence is or are correct in the context of the given passage? So we have 3 statements and we need to find out which is correct. Consultants and foreign investors argue that the conglomerate is a dinosaur of organizational design, too unwieldy and slow to compete in today's fast-paced markets. Okay, sometimes for questions like this, you can just look at the context. There will be very direct, concrete evidence from the context. Then we have core competencies and focus are now the mantras of corporate strategists in Western economies. And then you have the third point. Due to lack of information required, companies in emerging markets face much higher costs in building credible brands in comparison to their counterparts in advanced economies. So we're saying what is correct. So do these statements appear in the context? That's the question, right? So I'm looking at this, and in fact there is the same statement that is there in the answer. In second paragraph, if you see, it says the conglomerate is a dinosaur of organizational design. They argue the entire sentence is here. So this is true. We know option 1 is true. And we also know there are 2 things that they said are the mantras of corporate strategies in Western economies. First line, co-competence focus are now the mantras. So this is also true, right? What about the third one? Do we have evidence supporting the third statement? And where is that? The third, due to lack of information required, companies in emerging markets face much higher costs in building credible brands. Okay, it's right here. Look at this. It says, as a result of this lack of information, companies in emerging markets pay. The entire sentence is here. So which means the answer option for that question is all 3, right? And that is option 5. So let's move on to our next question. What suggestions have been cited by the writer in regard to raising adequate financing and hiring skilled employees? Is it effective securities regulation? Is it effective securities regulation and venture capital firms? Is it effective securities regulation, venture capital firms and strong education institutions? Or both 1 and 3? Or none of these? Okay. So let's go back to our context. It's right here. So it says, without effective securities regulation and venture capital firms, for example, focus companies may be unable to raise adequate financing. So the question was to raise adequate financing and to hire skilled employees. The options were effective securities regulation, venture capital, focused companies, and then strong educational institutions. So again, for this one, it's which option gives us all 3? It's option 3, right? Effective securities regulation, venture capital firms, and strong educational institutions. So all 3. The writer has cited some hurdles in the case of product markets regarding shortage of information. Which of the following statements in this regard is true? So I have 3 statements again. Communications infrastructure in emerging markets is often underdeveloped. Postal service is typically inefficient, slower, unreliable. High rates of literacy make it difficult for marketers to communicate effectively with customers. Now for me, it looks like there were these 3 reasons discussed in the passage. And one of the reasons these were highlighted. Let's go back. So it's right here in this slide, the second paragraph, where it starts off saying, first, the communications infrastructure in emerging markets is often underdeveloped. Postal service, power shortages, postal service is typically inefficient, slow, unreliable, and high rates of illiteracy make it difficult. So again, we have all three. So all three, which one gives us an option? Option 5. Let's move on. Next question. Which of the following statements is correct in regard to the given passage? The few analysts in emerging markets who rate products are generally less sophisticated than their counterparts in advanced economics. I think it's economies. Unlike in advanced markets, there are few extrajudicial arbitration mechanisms in emerging markets to which one can appeal, even as wireless communication spreads throughout the West. Vast regions of China and India remain without telephones. Unpredictable government behavior can stymie any operation. See, again, some of you did not understand what stymie is, right? In this context, you can figure out the meaning. So, is all correct? So, this China and India, again, we saw in the same place, right? Let's go back. See here, this passage. Even as wireless communication spreads throughout the West, remain without telephones, the communication infrastructure in emerging markets is often underdeveloped. So let's look at other options. To the first point, the few analysts in emerging markets. Let's go back. Yeah, here we are. So it's right here. It says, the few analysts who rate products are generally less sophisticated than their counterparts in advanced economies. So it seems like all of it is there, right? We understood the first one is there. So this we have is correct in regards. Unlike advanced, few, let's see where this appears. We know 3 is there. 2 and 4. It's right here. Unlike in advanced markets, there are few extrajudicial mechanisms which one can appeal. So having looked at the passage, we understand that for this particular question, everything is correct. So let's move on to our next question. What should be the most appropriate title of this passage? You could probably go ahead and look at the options and tell me what's the closest that you can come up with. This is an easy one again. Yeah, this is an easy one, right? We can safely say they're talking about emerging markets and they're talking about certain obstructions, hurdles rather.